Everybody, welcome back to the next episode of the Advocacy Help Desk. We are a network of advocacy innovators and practitioners running this free podcast, video, if you're watching on YouTube, show to help people in advocacy associations and groups get a little bit better at their craft. As always, we want to thank Brian Fracken and Spark Influence for their contribution to the show and support. And of course, today, our producer, the guy who's usually behind the scenes making this sound good or look good, hard job, Blake with Human Factor. And right off the bat, this episode is focused really on connecting with advocates during this time, both in terms, this episode is really important, both in terms of how we engage with them digitally, but also how we keep them activated right now during a time where we're entering a political season, an election season. Some people may be tuned out. Some people, may be looking at what's happening in Congress and see no movement. So how do we keep those people attached to us without hard selling around advocacy or around actions that we're asking them to take an action right now and nothing's going to happen in Congress. They're not likely to take an action unless they're going to see movement. So what do we do to engage those folks and keep those folks close to us during those times? And one thing, Blake, because Blake is the producer of our podcast at our association, FDRA, is podcasts. So what, from your perspective, because you guys run podcasts for a ton of associations, what are some people who have podcasts right now? What are some best practices? And then we'll get into, if you've never started a podcast, how to do it, really quickly. But for those who do have podcasts, how can they do things a little bit better during this digital age where there's a lot of people who seemingly are listening to podcasts much more?
I brought notes. So I think before you get to that even, let's look at what super successful shows like The Shoe-In Show and maybe Convenience Matters. I can't name all the clients. I want to play favorites, but you're sitting right there, so I'll play favorites.
There you go.
I guess in a way, there's as you know, there's two things that you do, and you could probably speak to this in a sense a lot differently than I can. But what you see is there's two ways that I see to go about it. There's one which is just straight up information. I think you guys did that in the beginning of COVID, where it was like, all right, here's the deal: factories are shut down, because people aren't going to get the information about their industry from CNN. I mean, if you run a pie shop, how are you going to get information on the status of wheat deliveries in the next 3 weeks? That's where I think it's time for associations to shine. So you have just straight up, almost like hard news, except you can tailor it straight into your members' ears or your advocates' ears. So you have that, and then the other way to do it, of course, is with the characters. Like I said before, big characters, unique circumstances, high stakes, and it's what's so great about associations is they almost always have all three. So obviously, it goes without saying, Andy and Matt are two good characters on The Shoe-In Show, if everyone who wants to hear it. So, and then the unique circumstances, that's what associations should be talking about, your industry's circumstances and what's going on, especially in a time like COVID. And then high stakes, well, obviously the entire country was shut down, so we had constant high stakes. And I think that's why, Andy, you've seen, and I've seen in almost every single client of mine, the numbers went through the roof. During this, because you guys are the voice of the shoe industry, and if you're an association, you should be, or an advocate, you should be the voice for your industry or advocatees. Do you say advocatees? What do you say?
I don't know. I think it's just the advocates with a lot of S's. But I think in because a lot of us are from political backgrounds, either having worked on campaigns or worked on Capitol Hill or lobby or whatever. And the whole phrase, all politics is local, should apply that all podcasts are local. We have to localize the content. People are tuning out to Fox, MSNBC, CNN. The majority of Americans are. You still have, there's nothing wrong with watching it and all that stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying if you're looking at your audience and you're looking at your advocates, most people are tuning out. And if there's an ad coming up for the election, chances are they're going to flip the channel or turn it off, or, and I don't even know people who are watching television right now. They're all watching on-demand Netflix.
However, hold on. I know I'm going to timestamp this now, but a few days ago, Joe Rogan invited Trump and Biden to come on his podcast. Now, you're not telling me you wouldn't want to hear that.
No, I mean that would be interesting for sure. But I'm just saying, like
Exactly.
advertisements and stuff like that, right? So, but
Right.
I think to your point is we keep advocates close by making sure that we deliver localized content to them. Meaning, we take what's happening in DC, we process it through a filter, right? Because not everybody understands political speak. We filter it through a filter that they understand, and we apply it, and we say this means this for us. And all of a sudden you become almost like your own news station, providing that direct content that matters to exactly what they care about. And typically it's their jobs. It's an economic issue. It's their jobs in the industry. So they care about this stuff. But to your point, during COVID, it accelerated exponentially because everybody was looking for best practices. And that's where you start bringing on, because I think part of the mistakes for shows are they just bring on staff and talk about stuff. And they don't think about bringing in leaders from the industry. And if you don't have it, and if you feel like your staff from a podcast perspective is a little bit too dry and you need a big personality that you don't have, that's where you find a person in the industry and you make them a co-host and you say,
or an influencer, like you guys did with Tiffany Beers.
Yeah, absolutely. So you find someone that, fills a gap that you need, and it could be knowledge. It could be, leading a show and having like an engaging person that makes jokes and keeps the conversation flowing, because you don't want to be PBS dry. Not everybody wants that. There's a section for that. You can do a news segment, and Blake's doing some of that now with Alexa, where you can do a quick news update.
You just set everyone's Alexas off.
Yeah, exactly. But you can do that. But for a podcast, I think it's amazing the reception that we've gotten, and we've seen numbers double. And I've talked to other people who have podcasts. They've seen their numbers double because it's a passive way to learn. You can do your work while you're listening to the podcast and get up tips and best practices. But I do think the key for our number increase was the quality of people that we had come on.
So I think you're absolutely right.
CEO, like that really, because people were like, okay, these guys are the leaders. What am I missing? And it really drove it. And in the same way, when we were bringing those guys in, we were keeping all our advocates, the whole industry, engaged with us and close to us, so that when we needed to take action around the stimulus bill and activate everybody, we could flip it like that. And we were actually bringing new people in by doing that. So I'm tying not just the association work, but the advocacy work back in, because it goes hand in hand, I think, around that.
Well, you were asking about, so we kind of talked about what people were doing. I think here's some of the things that I scribbled notes again before we started on an analog pen here. The thing I see a lot of, though, is a lot of people now are coming, you're seeing the virtual conference sort of turn into the podcast a little bit, like, oh, we're going to start a podcast, we don't have a conference. And they're trying to put that format. And I tell you, I've seen this a lot. And it's my job to bring the horse to the water. But you'll start a medical industry is notorious for this. It starts out with, hey, we're going to have Dr. McGillicuddy on. Dr. McGillicuddy, I'll do it like this too. Dr. McGillicuddy is a fellow at the blah, 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 blah Institute. He holds a blah, 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 and you've got 5 minutes of two guests' bios.
Oh, man.
That happens before the show. So back when I was in the music business, they'd say, don't bore us, get to the chorus. I would say the proper way. There's no proper way, but the way I would recommend, at least when you're starting out, or if you're you try to reformat, is, and you're good at this, Andy, is set up the problem, which was COVID time was pretty easy in the beginning. Oh my God, we're all going to die. But let's just take something like, they're not a client of ours, so let's take soybeans. I'm just making this up. You're with the Soybean Association. There's a water shortage or the fires are burning down, and we all know that in the Midwest. So here's what we're doing. Here's the problem. We're going to bring on Andy Polk, who's going to speak to this direct questions. If you need more information on Andy, he's the head of FDRA. Go to FDRA.org. You can see his entire bio, but he's really important. Don't bore us, get to the chorus.
I completely agree. And also, people forget, you can just type the copy in. People are using, if they're doing a podcast, then you do it really quickly, and you say, just like you said, just really quickly run it off, but get straight to the challenge, because that's what people want to hear. And then if you're posting on your website, or you're actually doing an event like that, then you LinkedIn on the copy underneath the video or the podcast that you're dropping on a website. You just put it there. But But the flip side is too, it's like if you're having to bring someone on that's like, you should bring people on that the industry already knows if you want to build an audience. Like there are times we bring on technical people and you have to do it really quickly. But if you're bringing somebody on and it's like, this is the director of this at this place, they should know that and it behooves us as podcasters to find those people, because that's what people want to hear from, are the leaders to begin with. So yeah, if it's technical, I get it, and you have to do that. But when we have a leader come on, we don't even do the brief bio. We're just like, hey Ron, how are you?
CEO of Birkenstocks.
Let's get straight into it. Like, what about this? Like, don't even like get into that stuff. Get into the conversation flow.
So let's go into conversation for a minute. So and then I have one more. Yes, I would say don't be afraid to interrupt. I know it's the CEO of Birkenstocks in your case, or the CEO of Nike, or whoever it is. But I find a lot of, again, especially in association land, especially in medical and maybe legal, people somehow get into presentation mode.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden now it's your member or it's a big influencer, and you're afraid as the host, especially when they're new, not to interrupt. No. Try to keep it like your answers, like we are now, 2 minutes, you talk for 2 minutes, I talk for 2 minutes, I talk for 10 seconds, you interrupt me. So no presentations. And
I, to that point, sorry, but I think it's about...
You just interrupted, see?
Sorry. It's about talking points. It's not about scripting everything out. If you're scripting everything out, you will never have a successful podcast, because you can never follow the conversation where it needs to go for what your audience needs to hear.
I will agree with you halfway on that. If you are doing an interview style podcast where you are literally not scripting everything out, you're absolutely right. Like if you try to say, all right, Andy, I'm going to ask you this question, and you answer this way. If you're going to do the This American Life, what's another one? Radio Lab thing, that's another animal, and we can talk about that on another show. But for the most associations, they want to get them in and out quick. Those style of This American Life shows take a long time, and I've done a lot of them, so I know. Consistency, I see most of the successful shows that I have drop some sort of consistency. So every Monday, every second Thursday of the month, release it with the newsletter. We're going to do a series from September to the end of October, and then we're going to do a winter series from February to March. The consistency I find is a huge one that you can gauge success. And I mean, think about it too. If you just go on a podcast site and you see, all right, they released one in May, and they did one back in March, and then the one randomly came out, and it's a different host each time. And then here's my final one for what we're working with now before we get into our big reveal, or our big what we want to get across here is, and you know this, and you guys don't have this problem because at least pre-COVID you all sat within 10 feet of each other. Mm-hmm. But some of the larger associations are very siloed. So the magazine doesn't talk to the newsletter, doesn't talk to the podcast, doesn't talk to back when we had events, to the events people. But some of the things I see when you see the really successful ones is like, all right, this month, here, I'll give you an example. This month in the magazine, we talked about the data that came out about the State of the Union in retail sales. We're going to bring on the author of that and the person he interviewed to break down these numbers that were in the magazine. If you want to check out the numbers, of course, check your mailbox or your inbox, whatever it is, for this week's for this month's newsletter. Welcome, Andy, to the show. Let's talk about customs and what the new customs report mean. Right. So now we've tied those together. And if the magazine at the same time says you can hear the interview with the author, now we got this. And of course, at the end, I can say, hey, by the way, Andy's going to be at the XYZ Expo in Long Beach. So come on out to the conference. And we got a triple play there to sell the conference, right, and or sell value in what we're doing.
Well, people, and to your point, people are always like, what am I going to talk about? And it's like,
but you're saying that.
Just read your newsletter. Just start from your newsletter. Start from that, right? And it's like, you need to mix in the DC-centric heaviness, politics stuff and advocacy stuff with a value-add play of content that matters to their jobs and to the industries to strengthen that. So there's this dynamic play where I think sometimes people in advocacy who run grassroots, some people only run grassroots, and then they tie in things, and I think the grassroots, in the same way that you're talking about the silos, needs to work more closely with association intelligence aspects and the people running like membership programs and things like that to tie it into a ball to make sure that when you're talking about the political side, you're also tying in something valuable. So you're capturing them there. And then the same way when they're talking about some kind of intelligence, information, data, reports, trends for the industry, you're inserting in your advocacy ask for that as well. So there's this dance that you have to have. And it's the same way for events. And I know we'll get to events in a minute, but it's the same way with your virtual events. You need to have, and this is where I think a lot of people in fly-ins do it wrong. They fly people in, they're going to train them on how to go to the Hill and how to advocate, which is great. And it's important, and they're interested and excited, and this is like a good give to the association, to the industry, but they also need to get. So you need to have, not just training sessions, but this is where you could have a workshop or a conference where you actually give them intelligence, non-related to politics, but industry intelligence, and fold them in and enmesh them more to your association. Doing it that way, not just pure play politics, not just pure play advocacy, but folding them into your association and get them more involved, more in depth, more ingrained, and expand your base that way. So, if you're only doing grassroots and you're not involved in other aspects of the association or groups or anything like that, no problem. But these are strategies that when you start, providing all these extra values, that's when your open rates go up a lot more, because they know they're going to get something instead of just giving something. And they do want to give, but people want to get something too. So we need to have those intertwined, I think, Blake, when we're thinking about this stuff. And that's why doing the podcast that way makes it successful, because they're going to get something out of it, while at the same time you can ask something from them.
So I'll do this one last thing before we get to you used to work on the Hill. You picked up the phone for some congressman, right?
Long time. Yeah.
So
many calls.
This is one of the values, sort of the unintended maybe values, or maybe it is intended. I don't know. Ring, ring, Andy. Hey, this is the Blake from the Widget Association. We'd like to come in and pitch you on something. Okay, there's that.
Yeah.
Ring, ring. Hey, Andy, this is Blake with the XYZ podcast. We have 10,000 listeners every week on the show. We'd like to interview Congressman such and such and get his thoughts on the thing that's really important. Which call you picking up?
Oh, I'm picking up the one that's going to get my boss in front of a lot of people.
Exactly. So, I mean, if you had, and that doesn't happen overnight, as you know. Your first episode, Andy, is a lot different than the one you did with us last week. But as you gain membership, I mean, numbers are king, right? I mean,
I think that's a great point, because I know a lot of people who have, instead of doing the fly-in where they're dialing in to members, they're having members come on these Zoom calls and on podcasts and having them do that. And the members have more time than ever before. And I think even going forward, when people are allowed to be face-to-face and meetings and things like that, there's still going to be a challenge around budget and fly-ins and all that stuff for a long time. And members they're going to forever change how they engage, because now that digital wall broke down for a lot of members, especially the older members who didn't really want to get on any kind of video call or podcast or whatever. You had to explain it in terms of radio to them. Even had to do, my boss was pretty savvy, but I would see my colleagues who are press secretaries struggle to get their bosses to understand early day podcasts and things like that.
I could go on and on about that.
But I think you're right. I think doing the podcast, then all of a sudden you pull on a member and then you let the member talk about what's happening and you give them real updates. And again, the median's amazing, because I think a lot of people are gravitating towards podcasts because there's no dedicated time commitment, meaning it's a passive way. I can sit here and do my work while I listen, just like I listen to the radio or to my Spotify. I can listen to something that's happening in my industry while I'm doing my work, and I'll pick up on the nuggets that I need to get. And I think that's why it's so important. It's not pulling from you where you read a newsletter and you have to read it, or you're watching, even on video. I hope, people who want to watch video, great, but video takes some time commitment too, where you're watching it for 20 minutes or so.
Yep.
And
you
so
do it on your dog walk.
Just audio is, so.
I think the greatest example when I saw you guys, I think, open your eyes to how cool it was when you called the White House about the TPP stuff you were doing.
Oh, yeah.
And you said that you said, why not? We'd like to interview Obama. Is he available? And they said, nope. And they said, well, how about Biden? They said, nope. And you said, how about the third in command? And they were like, sure.
Yeah.
And you guys were like, he said yes.
Yeah. So it was.
Holy crap!
USTR,
he said yes.
Yeah, it was the head of USTR. So we went over there and interviewed him, and it was.
But wasn't it wild that all of a sudden they're coming to you as opposed to you're begging them? It's like the whole thing's flipped. So anyway,
So if you, okay, so here's the other thing. If you haven't, so we're kind of bouncing around here, but if you've never started a podcast and there's barriers to why you haven't done it, never a better time than now. But we know there's for some reason in some people's, associations, there's friction. Maybe it's cost, maybe it's like workflow issues, maybe like you're just scared, maybe you're too buttoned down, maybe there's, roadblocks. So Blake, obviously with Human Factor, and Paul do an amazing job of podcasting, and they help people whether they want to have full service. So we at FDRA, we do full service because I don't have time to do a taping, do the editing, producing, and then post everywhere on my own. And some people will say, okay, well, we don't have that much money, but we want to post things and we want to make it sound good. So maybe we record ourselves and send it over to Blake and Paula. They clean it up and post it. So we get some professionalization at a lower cost. So there's ways to do it. But Blake, there's still these barriers. So let's break them down. How are we going to do it?
All right, we're starting out. So so when it comes to associations, what I see the most, I think, is the only way to put it is a lot of association, again, especially in medical and legal stuff, is scared to look bad. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to start an initiative and have it fail because, it looks bad in front of the members. Unfortunately, the only way you can do that is to look bad in the beginning. You will probably suck on your first show, and that's part of it. So I'll just give you we have an entire process that we're going to give away at the end of this show. Not
that's right.
Really, but kind of. We have a process of onboarding people. As an example, we would say to you, Andy, if you were starting your first show, hey, maybe don't interview the CEO of Nike because you're wearing that hat there, the CEO of Nike and your first guest. Maybe let's have Thomas, your head of government affairs. Let's interview him about what's going on. There's two reasons for that. Number one, you're not scared to look bad in front of Thomas. You can screw up in front of him. Number two, you probably know what his answers are going to be. So I would say do 2 interviews like that. And then the next one, the third one, maybe after lunch or the next day or something like that. The next one would be somebody, maybe a member who you're close with, but who you don't know the answers to their questions. So you actually have to kind of think a little bit, and it's not sort of like, I have my paper here. Thomas, so what is going on in the world of government, So there's that. And then here's another one that you guys still do that I have that's really interesting. And you guys were doing it long enough pre-COVID that you can do this. But I find some of the new people we work with, a lot of times they try to do these one-off recordings as opposed to booking like 3 in a row. And every show they have to kind of like get the dust off. Mm-hmm. And by the time they're halfway through the show, it's like, oh yeah, this is how we do this. Again, I have some clients who just can't do that for a number of reasons. Like the CEO, let's do the CEO of a giant association maybe can't book all day to record podcasts. But it's just something that I've been noticing is that sort of the frantic one-offs in COVID. If you got to do them, you got to do them. So I talked about the first one was the fear. You got the hat on, and you just do it. Whether you sit around an iPhone and record your first one to see how it sounds, or that we hook you up with microphones, which we did on day 1 of COVID. I sent you guys all mics and.
Yeah, and I would say this too: if you're doing it on your own, fine, and it's a good way to test out. Long term is not a solution because you need someone who's a producer to remind you every episode, keep it evergreen, button this down. Your intros are going too long. Think about the audience when you're. It's almost like this reminder that constantly comes up. And if you're doing it alone, you're not hearing those voices, and you think you're doing okay. You look at the numbers and you're saying our audience isn't growing. What's happening? Well, all of a sudden you don't have that critical thought, that expertise in the room saying, well, it's not happening because you're not focusing on your audience and you're not doing this and you're not giving them value and you forgot this and you forgot that. And that's not even the production side. That's not even, editing the audio, posting it, anything like that.
So I'm going to get to, now we'll get to our big reveal here. So the one thing I said was fear. And also I think it can seem overwhelming. I've done production since I was 10 years old, and you're not afraid of a microphone, Andy, but some people can be gun shy. It looks like a lot. How are we going to get all these shows up? Do we have enough time? We do an entire pilot process. And what we're going to do on our upcoming, I should say, episode of Advocacy Help Desk here is I'm looking for one association out there that is looking to start a podcast. We're going to do our kickoff meeting, which is part of our process. We're going to do our kickoff meeting before for free. This is all going to be for free with you. Everything we do with a normal client. Then we're going to record your first podcast, air quoting here, live with a little L on Advocacy Help Desk. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the process. The association and I can come on. We'll talk about why we chose the name of the show. We'll talk about what the theme's going to be, who the host's going to be, what the episodes are going to be. We're going to talk about all that for 5-10 minutes. Then we're going to play some music, do a short 10-minute show live, and then Andy and Brian will give me feedback and give you feedback as an association on what they thought. It's a pretty cool idea. I've done it for ASAE. Yeah. I've done it for ASAE. I've done it for FASAE, the Florida ASAE. And when we did it at ASAE, we had a good few hundred people in the room. So I think it could be a real fun thing for us to do in the show. So do I look in the camera when I do this, Andy? If you're an association and you want to start up a podcast, you were thinking about starting it up, we're going to do our entire human factor process for free. The one catch is you got to come on Advocacy Help Desk and do your first show and talk about the entire process, because there's so much. I wrote a book on this, and it's still, I don't think I captured it all. I'm on my second revision now.
Right. And here's the deal. This offer is super important because it's a professionalized setup. So even if after the first episode you guys decide not to do the podcast, at least you went through the process and know what it takes. And we're doing this on the show because we're the help desk to help other people understand the process and what goes into it, set it up to make a successful one, not just to put out content and not just to put out audio files, but to actually make a legitimate branded podcast to engage your members, to engage your advocates, to keep them activated. And it is a process. I mean, when we started, we had like 3 or 4 meetings. We had to answer questions. We had to answer what kind of show we wanted to do, like who we would have on, what's the frequency, what do we call it, what's the logo, what's, all this. So it's very, and you have to go through that to have it. But I think the problem is, to Blake's point, and why we're doing this, is a lot of people don't realize that and don't even know where to start. So we're going to do it on here to show you everything, where to start. It's probably a $4,000 value that Human Factor is giving away.
Yeah, and we're going to go through again, people say, what's it like? And I'm saying, like, what's it like to skydive? I can tell you all about it,
Gonna do it.
But until you're on the edge of the plane, which I have been, strapped onto another dude, and he says, put your head back, and 3, 2, 1. Once you're off the plane, then you're like, I love this or hate it.
Yeah.
But you're in it.
Right. All right. So anybody who is an association or a group out there who has been interested in starting a podcast, but for some reason that friction point of any number of things, you haven't done it, contact us, advocacyhelpdesk.com. There's a contact form on there. You can just LinkedIn me, Andy Polk. Drop me a line and let me know. And we're going to collect different associations, and we'll see who gets selected by Human Factor to get their own podcast kickstarted for free. And then post it on here so everybody can see how it was done, help everybody out, get over these kind of frictions or these fears that we have for podcasting. It's a huge opportunity. This is what we really, Advocacy Help Desk was started because we wanted to get people more on podcasts and more on media platforms and kill the fear. So I know no better way than actually, going behind the scenes fully and scripting everything out for everybody. So there's a playbook for people to follow. Blake, real quick before we wrap up the show, I know a lot of people out there are still doing virtual events. I feel like every show is kind of attached to a virtual event in some way because it's really how we connect with members and make sure our revenues are up at associations and groups, et cetera. But really quickly, what are some, you've been helping a lot of folks with their virtual events. What are some mistakes you see? What are some good tips people can apply right now?
I think the biggest mistake is trying to take your old event book and cram it into a virtual conference model. I see this all the time with, like I was part of one. They had a DJ, it really is. You have to think, in my mind, I'll give you another one. You put me in the spot here. The other one is if you're going to go live, totally live, why? Why are you going to add that? And they're not saying there's not a reason. The reason is for taking questions. But we've done a lot of pre-recordings that get run live, and some of them are very elaborate. Some of them are literally someone in front of a Zoom camera. But if you're going to go live with all those headaches, why? And again, the answer in my mind is so you can take questions and engage more. But if you're going to be live in front of, let's say, 1,000 people, are you really going to be able to take all those questions? So then why are we going live, truly live? That's sort of the first one. And then, I don't know, I've seen a lot of people try to throw these virtual parties and stuff. Personally, I don't want to go to a virtual party. I'm tired of them, but maybe I have virtual party fatigue.
I'm with you.
You're with an association. You throw them.
Well, so I have to oversee our events and programs, as well as, think about our advocacy strategies and things like that, and how the two intertwine and how we mold and keep people activated during these strange times, updated, provide value. And that's really my thing around a virtual event is the value play. I think people think so much about, oh my gosh, my revenue is off, or how do we keep these guys activated? Well, I think if you only really saw your members at virtual events and you can't go anywhere, you got to do more than the virtual event. You got to do a podcast, a virtual event. You got to do member calls. You got to expand the number of touch points. Number one,
right?
Just in terms of operations and all that. But for the virtual event, I'm with you. Our first event that we did virtually, we try to do a content drip strategy where we drop something at 9, 11, noon, 1, 2.
Yep.
And we found that people just didn't like that at all, and they didn't engage with it. They engaged with it whenever they wanted to. So then we went to a Netflix strategy and we saw a huge uptick in engagement, where we said, okay, every day at 9 a.m. this week, we did a week-long thing. Every day at 9 a.m. we're dropping all our content, all 9 videos and podcasts mixed in per day. We're going to drop it. We did 10 or 15-minute videos on topics with experts or industry leaders. Dropped all the videos at once, and we saw a huge uptick at 9 a.m. and then again throughout the day, where people knew it was already there. It wasn't they were having to wait for it. It was all there. There was less work for us as a workflow because we could just
less stress, right?
Less stress. So we started doing that, and then here's the other thing too. That I think the live events fit in, right? So I guess there's two things. The live events for me is exactly your point. It's the time for Q&A. You don't need to buy $100,000 platform to do Q&A. It's called Zoom webinars or centric webinars or whatever it is. The attendee does not care about the experience of a virtual event. They care about the value you're giving them and what you're telling them about what's happening in the government, about what's happening in their industry. So when you're thinking about your value play, you need to it's called value magnification. And it's, if you give me $150 or $200 for this event, I'm going to make sure that you're going to get $800 of value back in terms of something that's going to change your business, the way you do something, or how you understand what we're doing here. So that's what you need to be thinking about, is the value to the attendee. And what we did was we started marketing 2 different ways about our events. And one was the traditional just content play, where it's almost like a resource center where you get access, you go in, you watch the videos whenever you want to. And then we marketed all that as the summit. And then we marketed part of the summit was the webinar series, where you got the live Q&A with, a president of some company. And so we marketed that separately as a webinar series, same cost, and you get the other content. So some people signed up just purely based on the resource center, and they got the webinar. Some people just signed up for the webinars and they didn't even want the resource center, but they got that too. So all of a sudden you're running 2 campaigns at the same time to touch people however they want to engage the content. And it was a real winner for us. We had our largest summit ever. We had 250 people at this summit. We typically, we have good numbers, but this was from all over the world. And I expected 100 for, a minutia topic, right? But it was the value play.
I think that the big key takeaway for me, that if you're going to try to give that to an association or an advocacy group or whatever, is I have it on the other side of my monitor. I have one of the circle with a line through it, and it says the way we've always done it.
Yep.
Whatever your playbook was for live events, just throw it away or put it in the cupboard.
And do not hire someone that is not from the industry to do, like, no magicians, no DJs. Like, people they don't need that. They don't want that. Don't do a whole day thing where, I'm telling you, we did it. It was terrible. Where, at 10 we have this person, 11 this person. People don't have a full day to do this stuff from their home. They got kids, they got stress, they got to do. A lot of people in our industry are doing 2 and 3 jobs now because there were layoffs or furloughs haven't come back, so they're doing more work than ever before. We can't expect them to have a full day. What we can do is drop the content and say, engage with it however you want to over the next 4 months. Figure out what you want.
That was the one model I did see work. Drop the content, and then on Tuesday we're going to have a meeting, a Zoom or WebEx or whatever you want to use. We're going to have a meeting to talk about what the CEO of the big shoe company said.
Yeah.
And you'll get to meet him and ask him questions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that hard.
Right. And these events are extremely important to do for member engagement and to bring those advocates in and give them value beyond the government relations hard sell that we always do. We need to stop hard selling in this environment around take action. And that's all they see from us, right? From the grassroots people. The grassroots people need to think more about the value play. So you need to pull more people in across your association. You need to think a little bit more critically about the content you're talking about and fold in your ask into a give instead of just ask. We got to do this. We got to, people want to do that stuff, but they also want something. And it gets real. You can be very fatigued if all you're doing is getting stuff that says take action or do this or do that instead of saying, okay, here's where we're at. Here's this, so we got to give to get in this day and age. And I think events are definitely the way to do that. And at all our events, we'll fold it into a conversation. Like, what do you think about this? What should we do? So you fold it into all these different videos that you do, and there's subtle hints and cues to people to keep them engaged and involved. But I see a lot of people doing, to your point, Blake, you cannot replicate a physical event. You should not try to replicate a physical event. I myself, we started doing virtual networking at the very start.
Did you try to send drinks to people and stuff?
We worked with we did a summit and we tried to do that. It didn't work out, but some people tried to do that. But it's just let them buy their own beer. I don't know what we try so hard on the experience that we forget the value is the content. It's not the experience, and it's the same way with the physical event. A buddy of mine was with he was attending an accounting association event at where's that Ferris wheel just outside DC near the MG.
Oh, National Harbor. So
they
were all excited because they got the Gaylord. Yoo-hoo!
Yeah, so they went to the Gaylord and they had Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, was their keynote. So we're sitting there having a couple drinks, and I was like, how's the event going? He goes, it's going good. The conversations have been really good at networking, and then they've been really good at panels. But I don't know why they got Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Is it something I'm supposed to be? Is that driving me signing up, or am I supposed to go back home?
I've never understood those big keynotes, like whoever, like Brett Favre.
Why? You're wasting money, and I think a lot of it comes down to content filler. You think you have to fill a space? Guess what? End the day early. The value play is those panels, and it's that networking conversations.
Take that same money, throw a party or something.
Well, come on. And it's the same way, it's the same way here in DC when you have a fly-in. If you're doing an attachment, you're doing it right. You have this summit where you bring in leaders and you educate them or, about a trend or about, deeper policy dives, more than just training to go to the Hill. If you do that, you're doing it right. But don't hire a speaker to come and pay them $20,000 to tell them something that they can watch on CNN.
Hey, you guys, for your videos, you put them just in Vimeo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, or the other one is Crowdcast.
Mm-hmm.
Nice little one where you can have all your. Okay, I'm just curious. You don't have some giant.
No, we don't spend any real money doing our virtual events. We use Zoom to videotape our interviews. We use old content that people may have not heard. So the last event I grabbed some of our old podcasts and dropped them in. But you do your Zoom interview and then you use, Final Cut or whatever it is to do an intro and some music, and you throw it up on Vimeo and there you go. You don't need to spend a lot of money. But I do think at this day and age, I think an easy win to do is a virtual series for grassroots people where they go out to their members and they interview them about current affairs and the importance of staying involved. So stop using your own voice and start using someone else's voice. And it's pretty simple to do. Same way Blake and I are doing it right now. You can do a whole series. You don't need backgrounds like we have. You don't need any of that. It's the content. It's the content. It's the content that is.
What is it?
The content.
Okay.
And to that end, let's wrap it up there because I want to end on that note. But I do want to thank everybody for listening or watching the show. We've actually seen a huge uptick, in the engagement that we've seen, and we really appreciate it. And if anybody has ideas or tips on shows that we need to do, what basically this is the help desk. So what do you need help on? What should we be covering? Who can we bring on to cover those topics? Let us know. We've got some brand new stuff that's going to be coming up. We've got a big surprise coming. There's going to be a new guest host for some of our, I'm not going to reveal right now. There's going to be a new guest host that's going to be coming on, helping us out, develop new content, bringing on new people and new voices to grow the help desk and to grow the helpfulness that we hope we provide. But again, if you are an association, group, organization, whomever, and you have never started a podcast for any reason, we will help you start one. Human Factor is going to do it. Set it all up. You can test it. You can see if you like it, love it, or hate it. If you hate it, no problem. But if you like and you love it, there you go. You're off and running. No additional cost. Fully professional developed. This is a huge opportunity for everybody in advocacy. Even if you're in grassroots and your association has their own podcast, you could start your own podcast too. There's no reason.
What do you want him to do? Just like send you an email or something?
You can go to
we just kind of came up with this the other day.
So. advocacyhelpdesk.com. There's a contact form you can fill out. Just send us a note saying you want to be considered for this great opportunity, and we'll plug you in and we'll let you know if you're chosen. Or you can just hit me up on LinkedIn. It's Andy Polk on LinkedIn. Pretty simple. Just drop me a note or a message on LinkedIn, and I'll add you to our list and let you know. But this is again huge opportunity to engage and help educate and empower our advocates in this age in a way that I've never seen. We're basically at this point for our association, which is not very big. We have five or six full-time staff. We're basically, to Blake's point, he told me the other day, we're basically filling a small stadium every single month. We're getting,
it's kind of weird to think about, isn't it?
12,000 to 15,000 unique listeners through our
arena.
Industry. So, which is far more than any opens that we've had or anything like that. So our target audience is, everybody has different target audiences. Our target audience is very small. It's executives and CEOs. So for our industry, it's not that big, but to have that huge growth there is unbelievable for us. But I know for large associations that are absolutely killing it on the podcast too, they're hitting hundreds of thousands of people every single month with unique messages and unique branding. So that it's a huge opportunity for everybody. If you've not ever done this, to really kind of change the conversation. When we started our podcast, we were kind of seen as, I think in some ways, kind of outsiders to the industry. We were almost seen as service providers on lobbying and things like that. And all of a sudden, when we started to provide value and real ideas to the industry, I think we became part of the industry in a different way. So it's a huge opportunity. Again, it's an unbelievable transformation that you can have through podcasting. And then also for virtual events, we'll keep introducing new ideas around virtual events, because Blake and I keep doing these things and we keep learning every single time, make some huge mistakes.
Oh yeah.
Make them misunderstand audiences right and left, like what they're looking for, what problems they may have in terms of getting into a system, using it, all these things, but also learning a lot. And so we want to share any kind of tips and practices we have. But again, advocacyhelpdesk.com, full catalog of all our shows. Please go back and listen. All of them are super relevant. But appreciate everybody taking a listen. And as always, I want to thank Brian Fracken and Spark Influence for their support, and Human Factor, Blake and Paula, for their fantastic support in making us sound good and look good and publishing us across every single audio platform out there for everybody to absolutely listen to. Again, thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and until next time, keep advocating.